Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, A Thorn in My Side. The man who rules the world takes on an agent from the CIA from the Black Boule in this action-packed all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' A Thorn in My Side at Amazon.com and other online booksellers. One of my viewers wanted me to talk about anime in America in the 80s and 90s. Now, as a Gen Xer, I grew up with a lot of Japanese shows that were translated and adapted to American audiences, and a lot of kids my age back then, we didn't know that these anime shows were older shows in Japan, but they were just so cool when we were sitting there discussing them at the lunch table at CES 132 when I was a kid. And this anime that came along in the 1980s, a lot of us didn't know back then that these cartoons were again basically rewritten and repackaged from old Japanese cartoons and basically given brand new names as they were presented to American audiences. Now, my first experience with one of these adapted anime shows was called Battle of the Planets, and I remember that show coming on when I was about 10 years old in 1983. Now, Battle of the Planets was a big event for me as a kid, which we called it G-Force back then, and Battle of the Planets featured this team of characters, Mark, Tiny, Jason, Princess, and Keop, who would transform into the members of G-Force and take on the evil villain known as Zoltar. And we basically watched that whole series. I remember all of us in the 5th grade watching that series and discussing it at the lunch table, and the basically shocking final episode where we found out Zoltar was not the man that we saw all throughout the series, and that was the big shocker for most of us with Battle of the Planets. But what was even more shocking to me was when I got older and I found out that the show's title wasn't Battle of the Planet, but the whole series was originally called Science Team Gatchaman, and this whole team of Science Team Gatchaman was taking on the evil forces of Galactor, and a whole completely different series with a completely different ending. And that was a major shock to me when I got older, because when I was a kid I just basically took what they presented in the American anime series to be the truth, but I quickly learned that that was completely different when I got older. Now, the second big anime I remember growing up was when I was 11 years old and I was in the 6th grade, and that one was considered an icon of the 80s, and that series is Voltron. Now, Voltron had such a major impact on me as a kid that I basically, again, loved this show. And I loved this show so much that I basically, when I graduated from the 6th grade, my brother bought me my first Voltron Deluxe, which was a vehicle team Voltron, and I basically played with that toy until it basically fell completely apart. And I loved that figure so much that when my mother in 1987 got me the Lion Force Voltron on clearance at Alexander's, that was the first toy I ever collected and basically still have to this day. And that toy basically started me on the road to toy collecting, and I was basically floored when my brother brought me a new vehicle team set, the same one you see in the back of many of my videos, and also bought me the 3 robots Voltron, which comprise Voltron 1, 2, and 3. And Voltron basically, again, was what every kid basically watched back in 1984 and 1985. This was must-see TV. I mean, Voltron with the 5 lions that transformed into the mighty robot that took on Robeast on every weekday. That was, again, a major part of our childhood. And again, Voltron basically was Another big anime that became incredibly popular, and again was the most popular one of the anime series. And again, as I got older, I learned that Voltron really wasn't Voltron, but was a Japanese show known as Go Lion. And I was even more shocked to learn that Go Lion only went a season, but the people at King World Productions or King Features Productions, they basically took this series and made over 60 plus episodes as they adapted this Japanese show into an American one and gave it its own story. Now, in addition to the Lions Voltron, there was another show based on anime that became known as Voltron, and this was one of my favorite Voltrons, the Vehicle Team Voltron. Now, the Vehicle Team Voltron was 15 pilots in 15 vehicles on a space explorer going to different planets, and they had much more complicated stories, and I really loved the look of the Vehicle Team Voltron. That was one big thing that I enjoyed, and that Voltron I was shocked to find out was called a team called something Daruga 15, Space Explorer Daruga 15, and that was a completely different show, and again, completely different from the concept that they originally put together for Voltron, and it was really, again, a really fun show that, again, I look forward to watching every day at 4 o'clock on Channel 11 here in New York, along with the Lions Voltron. Now, there was supposed to be a third Voltron show that was supposed to be based on the 3 Gladiator robots, and that Gladiator robot, it really didn't sell very well because it didn't have its own show, and is now considered to be one of the most exceptionally rare versions of Voltron, but that was supposed to be another anime show called Obligus, or what it was supposed to be called, and the whole Obligus show, again, never got adapted to become the second Voltron or Voltron 2 on some boxes. It never got adapted, and sadly, we never got to see that one. But we were going to get a completely different Voltron, because originally a Voltron was supposed to be an adaptation of Daltonius. Now, Daltonius was a completely different show with a robot that transformed with a lion chest, and a kid in my class had the Daltonius. But the whole thing is that the Daltonius, they didn't get the Daltonius cartoon because somebody made a mistake and just said, I wanted a robot with a lion, and then they got Go Lion instead, and that's how we got the legendary Voltron as related to that show. Now, these were the big cartoons of the 1980s, as I know, as related to anime. Now, I know that there was anime going on as related to Japan, like Go 13, The Hitman, which was a much more mature cartoon. I know that was out there in the 80s, but for us kids who were Gen Xers, our thing was Battle of the Planets, our thing was Voltron, and our thing basically was these types of animated shows. And as we came out of the 80s into the 90s, there were other anime shows. One of those shows that I remember watching way early in the morning, about 6 a.m. or so, is a show called Dragon Warrior. Now, I know I'm going to go back in a minute to the 80s, because I got to talk about Robotech, but the whole thing is they didn't really run Robotech too much on Channel 11, but I do remember Dragon Warrior, and again, Dragon Warrior coming on 5 a.m. on Channel 7 when it was a local network. I remember it coming on 5 a.m., 6 a.m. Saturday mornings, and Dragon Warrior was a fun anime series and a fun one to watch, but sadly we never got to see the finish of the series because of the odd scheduling. Now, other people like Chris Crazy House, they could possibly tell you a bit more because he lives in a different area and they possibly ran more of the episodes. And usually with Dragon Warrior, again, you got a fun story with these 3 heroes. I believe there was a young kid, a girl, and an older guy. They were going on this quest as related to this dragon, and that series was a lot of fun to watch, and it was one that I look forward to whenever it would come on the air. Now, the other big cartoon of anime in the 1980s, I'm going winding back to the 80s, from the 90s, is Robotech, and I gotta go back to Robotech because Robotech was another anime that was huge here in America, and for a while I did own one Robotech Veritech fighter and a Rick Hunter figure. It had been in my collection for years, so I eventually wound up being forced to sell it when I ran out of money. But the whole thing is, I basically, again, I never got to see too many episodes of that show because Channel 11 would always run Voltron, and basically Robotech was out there for other people in other parts of the country, and Robotech was a big event for a lot of people. There are a lot of great toys from Robotech out there, like the Veritech fighters, and some of them would transform. And then you had the SDF one, the big ship that they had in space. And what people don't know is that Robotech was actually two cartoons. One was the Marcos cartoon with Rick Hunter. Another one featured a character, Zora Prime. And again, these two cartoons comprised Robotech. And for people in other parts of the country, Robotech was a big deal. It was a big deal. And a lot of people did buy those toys out there. But I didn't really see one until about 1989 when Kitty City was clearancing stuff out. Me and my brother used to go on toy hunts. Back then, again, I've been in this toy collecting game for a lot of years, but Kitty City used to have a lot of old 80s stuff, and I found a Robotech plane for about $15, and that was the only Robotech toy I've ever had. But I know that Robotech was a big line back in the 80s, and basically a lot of fun in the 80s. And again, the only parts of the 80s I really remember as related to things. Now, as we go from the 80s to the 90s, yet again, I'll talk about Dragon Warrior, again, underrated cartoon. But as we got into the 90s, we started seeing the anime, again, come out a lot more frequently as related to content. And we started to see more movies coming out as related to anime, and we got to see other anime series like Angel Cop, which I basically saw a while back. That one, a little too adult for me, and not really my taste, but we got to see a lot more diversity of animation as related to anime. Now this time I really wasn't that much into anime, because the anime out there was, a lot of it didn't really have toys, and I was growing up and going to college and, you know, trying to get an adult life, but I was aware that there was some animes out there. And again, one of the bigger animes out there was the Ghost in the Shell cartoon, and that was a huge one back then. And another one was the Dragon Ball series, which was Dragon Ball Z. That really started to become popular towards the late 90s. Now, this had been out in the 80s, I believe, the Dragon Ball cartoons, but the Dragon Ball cartoons were not adapted until about the late 90s, and that was around the time my cousin was starting to come into adolescence, and he basically could have told you a lot more about Dragon Ball, because I remember when he visited us in around 2000, he basically gave me a whole tape of Dragon Ball to get caught up on it, because the only way you could see Dragon Ball was because in cable, and they had it in Spanish syndication. I didn't have cable back then, but I remember him giving me a whole tape of Dragon Ball to get caught up on the Cell Saga and all of those cartoons. And I remember one of my former Facebook friends telling me about how, you know, people used to trade tapes of shows. I used to tape a lot of shows back then, but like Batman and Superman. But the whole thing is that a lot of people used to trade those tapes and watch the episodes of the Frieza saga, the Trunks saga, the Cell saga. I mean, this was big with a lot of millennial kids, the Dragon Ball series. And another one that was big in anime was the Pokemon series, and the other series known as Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is one of my favorites. I really used to enjoy watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Back in the day, because they reminded me of guys in the barbershop talking trash as they were playing with their cards. That's what Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to remind me of, and I used to enjoy watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Where he would say, I play this card in attack mode, and I play this card in defense mode, then go into all these crazy explanations into why this card was doing something. I mean, that was part of the fun of watching anime in the 80s and the 90s. And again, the other part was seeing the whole evolution of anime, with us getting much more richer and more complex storytelling. And that's one of the things I loved about Japanese animation, is that they valued the entire art form as related to animation. Whereas in America, they basically see animation as a children's medium, but in Japan, they basically see animation as an art form, and you can really get some really fantastic storytelling, and that's one of the things that I loved about anime. I mean, as a kid, I really loved those big robot stories and the big robot craze of the 80s. Again, I always loved those big Godaiken robots, which eventually became the Voltron Deluxes that basically were a cornerstone of my childhood, and I really enjoyed, again, those toys, and it basically led to a further growing of love for animation, because my love for animation started out with basically the Disney cartoons, but eventually I really, as I came out of the Disney cartoons into adolescence, I really started to like, the richer, more complex storytelling that anime had, and eventually started to see in a lot of Disney cartoons like Disney's Gargoyles or Batman the Animated Series or some of the Sony Anastasia movies. I mean, when it comes down to anime, again, anime in America had an impact, I believe, on American animation. We started to see the animation in America grow in the 90s, basically because people were having experiences with anime, seeing how much richer and more complex the storytelling is, and seeing how richer and more complex the storytelling is. This is what got people excited about animation as an art form, and basically led to us having that golden age, I believe, of the 90s in animation, where different studios were trying different things. And again, I've always loved a lot of anime, and again, grew up with anime, and I always enjoy anime because it's just really great animation, really great storytelling, and I'm really happy that the viewer wanted to talk about this subject, because there's just so many great memories I have watching these cartoons, and these cartoons were a major part of my childhood, and I really would love to share these cartoons with everyone out here as related to this great medium. Now, this was a video requested by one of my viewers, and if you want to request a video, you can drop a donation for a minimum of $15 to the PayPal or the Cash App, and if I know something about that subject, I will make that video for you. And if you want to check out some of my action-packed fantasy on the SJS Direct imprint, you can check out my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, which is available on Lulu.com in paperback, and you can get a paper copy for the same price as it was on the 2022 Kickstarter. And if you want to check out my first digital comic, Esteem No Good Deed, you can get that comic for just 99 cents on Kindle, or you can get a paper version on the Esteem series book, Esteem Blast from the Past, and you can also check out the other books of the SJS Direct universe in paperback and Kindle format, such as those in the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my vampire novel, Eternal Night, my sorority novel, The Thetas, and my novel, The Recipe for Success. You can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. A man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this action-packed, all-new Esteem series adventure. Get your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.